Okay, guys, we have Mark now here from HoneyTracks from Munich. As I said, he will be talking about metrics mainly, but you can know better than I do.
Yeah.
So it's a totally different aspect of game analytics. So what do we actually measure, or what can we measure? What are the interesting metrics and all this stuff? So Mark, you're auditorium.
Auditorium, I'm on stage right now. So hi everybody, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Mark. I'm from HoneyTracks. That's the name of the company. What we do is we do game analytics, and I'm invited because of that. Yeah. So I wanted to introduce our company first. We're a startup based in Munich. Yeah, and we provide analytics services for games companies. So what we do is one, we do deep analytical, or we offer deep analytical capability, drill downs in all possible ways. And we say it's the best in the industry right now. We do that for all types of games, so social games, browser games, or web games, client games, so games that you would install on your PC, and also for mobile games. It's in real time. Yeah. So you do something and you get the data in real time. We provide standard metrics, like we track revenues, daily active users, but you can also do custom metrics, such as a race start if you have a racing game, or battles if you have a battling game or war game. It's easy to use graphical interface. Everybody in the company, technical people, non-technical people, and even management can use it. Yeah. And yeah, so it's really widely used. Yeah. Game designers use it, product management use it, marketing, so everybody from the top down uses our product in different aspects. So what I wanted to talk about today is kind of this. Yeah. We get asked a lot, yeah, so what are the most important metrics we should be tracking? Yeah. And you know, some people it's 3, some people it's 5, some people it's 7. Yeah. And there is no answer to this. This is a never-ending quest that these people undertake, because there is no such thing as universal 5 most important metrics for a game. Why? Because of 2 reasons. The first one, each game is different. Yeah? Each game is different, and you want to track different things in a different game. And the second one is, every game, like any product in the world, has a life cycle. Yeah? So when you come out with your game, the needs that you want to optimize, or the problems that you have in your game, are different compared to the ones when the game reaches maturity, or then at a certain point in time the game will go into a state of decline. Yeah? And then even other things are important. And corresponding to that, you would always want to track different things. Now, you're launching your game. Yeah? You developed it for, I don't know, 6 months or something. And now the question I want to, now you want to grow it, right? You launch it in the market and you want to grow it. What's more important? What would you rather have? Would you rather have double the reality, or would you have half the churn rate? So let's take a quick poll. Yeah? You're a game developer, you're faced with the question of, do I want this more or that? So who's for double the reality? You have the choice.
And you have both. Both the cake and the ice cream.
You want both later on. Right now, that's the choice we have. Yeah. So that's the choice we have in our game design. So we can do that or that. So double the reality. Who wants half the churn rate? So that's more people. Okay. So the wisdom of the crowd kind of won here, and I wanted to illustrate that with the following chart. Yeah. So here's a chart that maps the number of users in your game over a period of months, assuming that you would put 1,000 users into the game initially. And here's our assumptions. Yeah, we have the viral invites per user and the churn rate, and you see that's done in half. Yeah. So what happens with the viral game? It clearly shoots up because it is viral, but then because of the higher churn rate, it drops off really, really quickly. The game with better retention also goes up, and then the churn rate, but the better churn rate kicks in, and then what happens is that on average you have a high number of users in the orange game. Yeah? And the second interesting thing is that you see you have many more users later in the game. And with many games, or with many free-to-play games, people people pay the first couple of weeks for free, or, you know, whatever time they pay for free. And once they really get engaged in the game, that's when you can create those so-called whales, people that pay a lot. Yeah? And clearly, a person that has played the game for 6 months is much more engaged and invested in the game in terms of gameplay. So the propensity to play is probably higher. Yeah? So then this maps out over the game life cycle which types of metrics you would want to focus on initially and then later on. So with the previous slide, I tried to make the point that first, when you design your game, you would want to focus on retention metrics. Yeah? Because if you don't have those, you have no game. This will happen to you. Yeah, you will shoot up and then fall down very, very quickly. And then second, of course, user acquisition is important. So marketing metrics and stuff, we're going to talk about that in a minute, virality as well. And then last but not least, so you get users cost effectively into the game, right? So that's also important, clearly. And then last but not least, monetization metrics. You know, as a game reaches or goes from the growth phase to a phase of maturity, when you have a stable number of users in the game, you will want to monetize that user base if you're doing a free-to-play game. All of this basically applies to free-to-play games. This, of course, doesn't mean that once your game reaches maturity and you're kind of here, that you want to forget about retention. Yeah? So there's clearly an additive view. Yeah? So don't forget about retention. You would, it's more like additive. Yeah?
What time frame are we speaking about?
So that depends. Yeah? You know, sometimes games come out and they're perfect. That rarely happens. Yeah? Sometimes you're in alpha or beta stage for months. Yeah? And then you would want to work on that to make sure that users who come into the game, that they really, you know, they complete the first levels, they go through all of the funnels that you think are important for them to be, for them to become a player that stays in the game. Yeah. And then this depends on how far, you know, basically how long your growth curve is. You know, when you see that you depleted the user potential in your game, then you reach maturity, right? You're going to see that, right? If the user growth flattens and you can't acquire users cost effectively anymore, then you will want to focus on that to increase the lifetime revenue of a user, and maybe then you can acquire some more expensive users again.
Yeah, but what do you stand average is the time you need to get to the monetization stage?
Again, I think it depends. It totally depends. I mean, how fast you deplete your user base, your user potential. You know, if you're like growing really, really strongly for a prolonged amount of time, yeah, then focusing on these aspects may be important. And then when you see, well, I have 10 million users in my game, stable, yeah, and that's good, and that's not growing any further because that's the potential that I have with that game, then you want to focus on monetization. But it really depends on individual games. Yeah? So what I want to do in the following slides is, go through each of these steps and talk a little bit about the specific metrics that you could track. Yeah? So the first one is about the retention metrics. So the metrics to start with when you want to track retention. So these are 6. So 1 to 7 day retention, so user comes in, what percentage of the users come in on the first day, second day, third day, up to the 7th day. Most games have tutorial, so you would want to track the steps they go through in your tutorial. Drop-off rates by level, so most games have levels or some measure of progress, and then understand at what level do users leave the game. Visits per DAU, yeah, so that's an indication for how many times they come back per day. Clearly more is better. Session times, so do they come into the game and play on average 2 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or an hour per day, yeah, or per session, and then you can count the session count per day as well. And then of course the churn rate per month, so out of the users that you have put in on the 1st of August, how many are still there at the 31st of August, and how many are still there at the 31st of September, and so forth. So these are the metrics. Now, what to do with that? Yeah. So you look at those numbers, and numbers in themselves don't give you really actionable insight, right? So one number will go one way. So here are some ideas. These are just some ideas that I wanted to throw at you. So if you think about the tutorial steps funnels, where you see significant drop-offs, every game developer probably will see that in a certain step there's a higher drop-off than in another one. Optimize that. Yeah, look at specifically that step and try to make it better. The same applies for any other user funnel that you think is important. So you can map out the first couple of levels and say what are the key events I want my users to go through in levels 1, 2, and 3. Set that up as a user funnel, and then you can track that. And then see again where people really lose the interest. That's kind of more the same. Yeah, and then if you see that people drop off at a certain point, and it could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because they have too little energy. It could be because there's too little stuff to do. They have tons of energy, but there's not just enough stuff to be doing in the game with the energy. Yeah. So play around with giving more and less, and with that, independent of that, you could set up an A/B test. Yeah. And pretty much brings me to the last point: A/B test game mechanics. So for any of these things, run an A/B test. Put 10% of the users that you acquire every day onto a B variant. Yeah, and see if the ideas that you have developed here, in terms of optimizing the tutorial, if those work better or not. Yeah. Then acquisition metrics. So these 6 metrics, I think, are a good starting point when you think about the next step. Yeah, here, think about how do I optimize my user acquisition, so conversion rates of your marketing materials or your marketing stuff. That broken down a little bit further. So this gives you an indication of what's interesting. This gives you an indication, so CPC, cost per click, cost per install, player acquisition cost is PAC, so how much it really costs, and break that down by marketing channel, by hidden graphics, by geography. Yeah? And then really track any important metric that's also related to revenue, because at the end of the day, revenue according to cohorts. Yeah? So out of geography, you can say, for example, German users, do they generate more or less revenue? Are they more or less profitable for me? Yeah? Or 35-year-old women, are they more or less profitable than 20-year-old women? Yeah? This is what I mean with that part. Metrics by user source like player lifetime revenue or player lifetime value. Yeah? So these are the metrics. Again, some ideas, only some ideas in terms of what to do with those. Test different marketing channels. Yeah, so games typically have tens, if not hundreds, of different marketing partners. So test different ones and track those metrics again. See where your most profitable users come from. Different creatives, different targeting, and then of course this is key. Player lifetime value must always be greater than player acquisition cost if you want to be profitable. Yeah? If you say, well, I want to be a venture-backed company, and for now it's fine to be lower here and to not have profitable users and just grow very fast, that's also a decision, but that's a conscious decision you can then take if you know those two metrics. Okay? So here's an example of how that might look. So this tracks the number of DAUs a certain game acquired through different marketing channels. Yeah? So as you see with blue here, a lot of users came in through channel 1, and in channel 32, just about half. Yeah? Then, on the other hand, revenue was split up in the same way. So the revenue that this marketing channel generated, number 1 and number 32. Yeah? So while channel number 1 is great for acquiring users, you see when it comes to revenues, it's not that great. It's really this other channel some super duper ads, which generates revenue. Then the other thing which is interesting is to also map that with payout. Certain marketing channels might give you certain types of users where you have more or less fraud, for example. Yeah. And then you see channel 1 generates this revenue, but you have to deduct a whole bunch off the top because it's fraudulent. There's fraudulent behavior involved in that. So virality, 5 virality metrics. The K factor, which tells you how many. There's a whole bunch of. First of all, there's a whole bunch of definitions of K factor. So if you want to Google that, and if you see companies talking about this at conferences, particularly social games conferences, everybody throws around this thing, and everybody has kind of a different definition. Yeah. But a good general way to think about it is if you have one user in your game, how many additional users will that initial user bring into the game? Yeah. So the K factor of 1 means the user will bring, on average, one additional user into the game. K factor of 2 means you will bring 2 fresh users into the game. So that's 1. The number of sent invites per DAU. So particularly on Facebook games, people can send invites, but the same kind of goes for browser games, but to a lesser extent. How much do people get active in terms of getting stuff out there? The counterpoint to that is the acceptance rate. So people get spammy, more or less, by sending out invites. Which of those get accepted? Yeah, so you would want to know that. Then something which gives you a higher level view is like which percentage of my user base is acquired virally, as opposed to which users did I get through acquisition, so paying, so through marketing, or through cross promotion. And then tracking those viral users by which viral channel. Yeah? So particularly on Facebook, there's a whole bunch of different viral channels that are possible, that the platform offers. So you would want to know from which ones do the users come. So for example, do they come a lot from the feed? Do they come from personal invites? And so forth. So stuff to do in terms of how to improve those metrics. Again, only just some ideas. A/B test the content for the viral message. So what's the message you want the user to send? Yeah, that can make a difference. At what point in the game do you ask users to send viral messages? You want to do it early, at the beginning of a session, at the end, when they achieved something, and so forth. And then A/B test also different acceptance mechanisms. What people have to do in order to accept the message and come back into the game. How does that whole experience look and feel like? And last but not least, now we're here in this lifetime chart, monetization metrics. So that's ARPU, average revenue per users, RPPU, average revenue per paying user, the payment conversion rate. So in free-to-play games, most of the users don't pay or never pay. How much are actually paying is what we want to know. If somebody does a transaction, how much? How high is that? Is that €1, €2, €5, 10, 20, or 40 euros? What's the event that makes a non-paying user to a first-time buyer? That's a key thing. Yeah? And it's very important to think around that because a player that has made a purchase once, I read in some research recently, there's a 60% likelihood that that player will pay a second time, and then there is a 40% probability that this particular player will pay 3 times. And again, you would want to form certain cohorts around those paying users. So where do they come from? Yeah? Which marketing channels, which geographies give me those paying users? And then last but not least, this also ties back to what I mentioned in the beginning when we talked around the acquisition part, player lifetime value. Over the lifetime of a player, which may be any time between 2 weeks and 12 months, how much revenue does a player generate for me? Things to play around here is A/B test alternatives to improve first-time buyer conversion. So once you know this event that turns most people, or has the highest likelihood to turn people into paying users, play around with it. Offer specials where you can play around with price elasticity. Yeah? So what happens if that item becomes 20% cheaper? With more and more, the higher, will that generate, over the lifetime, positive revenue, more revenues for the game. You can also play around with variance. So if you find out that a certain type of tank is the virtual good that triggers the first time payment, make variance of that tank. Yeah? Make it a pink one with less capabilities and the yellow one with more capabilities, more expensive. And then you can see what happens. That has a positive effect. And optimize the user flow towards this first purchase trigger. Yeah? So once you know where it is, make sure everybody gets there. Yeah? So i.e. minimizing the churn rate before that event. Make sure that a lot of people get there. Give them energy, give them points, no matter what. Just make sure they get there. And then you can play around with different kinds of packages, optimize the payment process, and A/B test pricing. Yeah? Always play around with pricing. It's always interesting to find out the price elasticity of a certain virtual good. So once you've done that, we work our way from here all the way over to here with what I would call standard metrics. Or what we have seen so far is generic metrics. Those do apply to pretty much every game. Yeah? So once you've done that, the next step is to move towards custom metrics. Now you want to look a little bit more deeper into the game. Yeah? Because that then gives particularly game designers true insight into what can I really do to improve the game specifically. And here's an example. Yeah, I want to walk you through this real quick. So this is what I call peeling the onion. Yeah. So you might observe a slight decrease in ARPU in July. Yeah. So you're looking at your game, you get your reports, you say, oh, my ARPU, average revenue per user, is going down. This could have a whole bunch of reasons. One reason could be that the RPPU, the average revenue per paying user, is going down. So in this case, not the case, remain constant. But the payment conversion rate is decreasing. Yeah? The decreasing payment conversion rate, in turn, could have a whole bunch of reasons. One reason could be that the payment conversion for existing users went down, which is not the case, that one stayed constant. But the payment conversion for the user cohort in June is very low. So the users that we acquired here in the previous months, they have a lower propensity to pay. Yeah? This in turn could be driven by a whole bunch of factors. It could be that users acquired from marketing channel super duper ads have a lower conversion rate. It could be that the mix of users changed in terms of countries from where they come from. So you change your marketing from acquiring, let's say, American users, which generally have a higher ARPU, towards users in, that's a good example, let's say users in Indonesia, for example. Yeah? And then last but not least, another reason would be that the pricing for a virtual good, which typically was the first virtual good that users purchased, changed. Somebody in your company changed the price of that virtual good. Yeah? Made it higher, and then for that reason the payment conversion dropped. Yeah? So to really understand in detail, that's the point of that slide, it's typically necessary to be analytical about it. Yeah? You have this, that is what you observe, yeah? And then to really understand the root cause, what you have to change in the company to kind of make it better, may lie levels further down, or we say peeling the onion at the core of the onion. So finally, I wanted to throw some examples at you in terms of how peeling the onion creates, does create this value. So ARPU is a very simple metric to track. Yeah? If you're a game developer, you would know that number by heart. So here's an example of a game that was launched sometime in April. So the ARPU grew and then stayed around €2. Yeah? ARPU, to calculate the ARPU is super simple. You take the revenues of the last 30 days, divide that by the average number of active users you had in that month, and that's your ARPU right there. Now, what we did here is we took a couple of cohorts. Yeah? So we took the users that were actually acquired in April, which is the orange line, and then the users that were acquired in May, and that's the green line. Now, the first thing that we see is the orange line, so it starts at 0, and then people pay, and then it peaks at 4. Yeah? Which is the first insight you get from disaggregating this data, is that your ARPU is actually not €2, because that's a blend of old and new users. The ARPU for a user is 4. And then the second thing that you see on this chart, which you don't see in this aggregated chart, is that May got better. So the May users paid earlier because that's higher, and they also pay more because it's higher here. Yeah? And this is really interesting because this can have a huge effect on your revenues, right? What's that? That's probably 15% revenue improvement opportunity or revenue improvement that you have right there. So you want to know why that is. Did something change in the game? Did some pricing change? Did my user mix change or whatever? Here's an example that's geared around first-time buyer conversion. So that goes through a couple of steps. So what you can do is you map out your revenue by level. Yeah? So you see the revenues in those lower levels are pretty small, and then here is where I generate most of the revenues. When we map that out over the number of users per level, you see that this revenue gets generated by very few users. Yeah? So the majority of the users, the bulk of the users are really active here, but they've churned out by that point in time. However, what we see here is when we map out individual purchases or transactions over levels, we see that we do have some action already at the lower levels. Yeah? So there are some actions, some transactions going on. To zoom into more detail on that, is that what are people buying at those lower levels, at levels 0 to 10? And then we took just 2 virtual goods here, and the orange one is food, and the green one is crafting. And what you see is that food gets purchased a lot in the beginning, whereas in later levels the green bars become higher, which means crafting is purchased more. So, for people at lower levels, food is the interesting virtual good. That's what people purchase more. So if you wanted to improve your first-time buyer conversion, an idea would be to start off by offering food specials to your users. So you send them an email, say, food is 25% off this weekend. Yeah? And you see what happens. If that achieves positive results, then you can say, I want to try to lower the prices for food altogether. Yeah? So forever, I will drop the price of food by 25%, which increases the probability that users in lower levels will become buyers. And that's important because what I see most with games companies, they go out and say, this weekend everything is 25% off. Yeah? It's like taking a shotgun and giving away money. Yeah? If your goal is to improve first-time buyers or first-time buyer conversion, then you should be doing something like this. And yeah, I won't go into too much detail on that because I think actually doing pretty well. So whales is also something important. Yeah, so the whales are the people that pay the most in your game. Yeah? These are the people that spend hundreds or maybe thousands of euros in your game. And it's important to track those people and their behavior. Yeah? So you see, what's their transaction record, who are they, where do they come from, what payment methods do they use, and most importantly, this kind of maps out their behavior. Yeah? So what are the steps that somebody undertakes to become a whale? Yeah? And once they are one, what are the things that they do and what are the things that they purchase? Yeah? So this gives you an understanding for what do the whales like, how do they become a whale, and once a whale, what do they do, what is interesting to them. And then a way to monetize that better is to say, well, for example, this particular whale, pink has always been the case. So you find some color here, for example, that is new, and they say, okay, what is that? So this whale started to do this. Yeah? And then if that's the magic bullet, then offer 3 magic bullets. Or offer a discount, or offer a more expensive magic bullet to a whale at that stage. Yeah, that's the final. So yeah, to summarize, that's my summary slide today. What's the general approach? Start with retention metrics, then move to user acquisition, virality, and monetization metrics. Also start with standard metrics. Those are the ones that are mapped out on the left side of those slides, yeah, which are generic for every game. And then move to custom metrics, metrics that are particular to your game, to really derive actual insight in terms of what can be done in terms of game design, product management, in terms of marketing to make it better. That step actually peel the onion to derive these actual insights based on the metrics with things like cohorts analysis, funnels, and so forth. I think it's important to understand it's an ongoing effort. Yeah, so this kind of never stops. You know, most modern online game companies push software every week or every 2 weeks, and every single software push typically has an implication on the metrics. Yeah. And this effort also involves or is cross-departmental. Yeah? So you can't say it's just the marketing people looking at this. They are looking at certain things and are looking at certain metrics, but it's also relevant for product management and game designers, and of course also for management has also certain needs that they want to, or certain metrics that they want to look at. Yeah, and then of course, you know, I would say that because that's the business I'm in, make sure you have the right analytics system supports all of that. Yeah, that actually concludes the talk. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How is it implemented in your platform? So do you have for different sorts of metrics, different flies or different API codes or whatsoever that game developers and game studios can implement different metrics? Or?
Yeah, so we have an SDK for all kinds of different games. So for PHP games, for Flash games, for iOS games, Android games, so there's an SDK that we provide. But the approach is fundamentally very generic. So very simply, what we do is we track individual events. Yeah. So our technology is that we track events very, very, like what you talked about. Our technology provides that events are tracked very, very fast. Yeah. And then we take them, they get stored somewhere, and then also pretty fast. Yeah, not as fast, but still pretty fast. They get processed on our analytics servers. Yeah, where we make sure that they are visualized in a nice way and in an understandable way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, how do you compute the customer metric value or player metric value?
How do I
Yes.
compare it?
Yeah, what's the common way of
Calculating it.
yes.
Okay, yeah, to calculate. There's different ways, yeah. But I think the easiest way is to understand the number of months a player is in your game times the ARPU on a monthly basis. So if you multiply those two, then you have player lifetime revenue.
Okay. And do you assign a customer lifetime value for new users or DS? So how do you do this inference?
Okay, well, I mean, first of all, you have to track it for each individual user, right? So when a fresh user comes in, per se, you don't know the lifetime value of that user. Yeah, that's one thing that we are kind of working on right now. It's like predictive analytics, and we say this user has, after the first 3 days of gameplay, certain characteristics which make him or her likely to play with that lifetime value. Yeah. So that's prediction. I didn't talk about that at all. Yeah, but that's kind of the next step. Yeah.
What kind of technology do you use to store the data, and how many data do you collect currently from your customers?
So the technology, I'm not the CTO of the company, so I can't really answer that. But if you're interested, I'll put you in touch. Yeah. So afterwards, give me your card, and then I will follow up with you. In terms of number of events, right now we're tracking, I think, 150 or 200 million events per day. Christian?
Yes, so you said that the system works in real time. So don't you see potentially a problem for very high load? So when you would receive, say, a couple of billion messages per day?
Well, I mean, so that's a fair question. Yeah. I mean, so far we haven't seen any issues. Yeah, so we're in business for a year now. And we scale from very small, you know, as I said, we're a startup, yeah, to now hundreds of millions of events per day, and we have seen zero issues. Yeah, we have some very large game developers have tested us for a few months. Those tests were positive, and now they're implementing their whole game portfolio with us.
So do you have benchmarks for testing like for 2 billion or some building?
I think we do. Yeah, I think we do. Yes.
Okay.
That's also important for us, right? Because we also want to keep it cost effectively, right? As a business, we need to make money too. Yeah? So scaling is always what I learned as a non-techie. Yeah, it's a matter of being smart or throwing money at the problem. Yeah. So clearly we wanted to be smart here, yeah? And not throw necessarily money because that comes at our cost. That's the money. Yeah.
Is it possible to drill down into the data by any arbitrary dimension and any arbitrary combination of dimensions? Or is it just prepared charts that display the metrics of the dimensions in a ready-made way?
Because our system gives you a lot of flexibility. I wouldn't go as far as to say arbitrary, yeah, because I don't know what you exactly mean. That's kind of an endless thing, yeah, which the answer to that is always no, yeah. But it gives you a lot of flexibility. So for example, if you are interested to look at the user cohort that is the users who signed up on between 1st of July and 10th of July, women in Spain with an age 25 to 35 through marketing campaign so and so. This is what you could set up. And if you say, I want to look at that, I want to compare it to the period from July 11th to 20th, you can do that. So I think it gives you a lot of flexibility. And in fact, maybe already too much. Yeah. Yeah?
Do you provide any feedback to the originating system? For instance, if you want to do something like differentiate prices for different user groups, so you find the whales. So you want to increase prices only for one user group because you know your whales will pay anyway. So are there any means to get the data, this kind of business data, back to our system?
So hang on, let me make sure I understand the case here. So what you want to do is you want to throw different prices for a certain virtual good at different user groups. Okay, so that's something which is kind of, you know, in our vision. Yeah, we call that that's kind of CRM, customer relationship management for games. Yeah. Where you customize the game experience to individual users. Yeah? So in social games, for example, I know Zynga does this. Yeah? They give you all kinds of pop-ups. You buy this now, or additional land is 25% off. That's not super smart. Yeah? Because, as you say, some people might use it by like it, but for other ones, they wouldn't be interested in it at all, but they would be interested in something different. Yeah?
Yes, you all have all that data.
We have the information. Yeah, now we need to build a product.
Are your customers mostly customers who are at the beginning of developing their games? Because for me it sounds really difficult if you have closed or if you have finished your game and you have maybe 2 or 3 reports and then you decide to get a new BI system, new reports about the games. Is it possible? Because you have to have all these different interfaces at the beginning when you develop it. And in the beginning you do not really know maybe which reports you want, and then you want this system. Do you have customers who have finished their game and then say, okay, we need a BI system?
Yeah, I mean, this one example that I was referring to your answer is they tested the game with a live game, which is huge. It's one of the biggest games in Germany, or from a German developer, one of the biggest games, which has been around for years. Yeah. So that's well possible. I will say that most of the customers that we have, they start with a new game. Yeah. But the other one works too. You know? And now that's being rolled out across their entire portfolio.
Because then they must have all the information at their warehouse or at their databases.
Well, not necessarily. Yeah. I mean, data warehouses and stuff, they kind of work a little bit different. Yeah. Because they don't process these things as fast. Yeah. You put the data there and you build your OLAP cubes or whatever, that takes time. And it's not information to finger this. Yeah.
Okay.
So basically what you will do is you go through a game code, yeah, and say, okay, these are the events I want to track.
Okay.
and then the game is ready to go, whether that's a new game or an existing game. And then in some cases, we did some extra work to integrate that with existing data that might be there, and with some database that they have and so forth. But I think in this particular example, they decided to leave everything the way down. Just go with what we do.
And how do your customers pay fixed price or for amount of data?
So the pricing depends on the number of users in the game. Yeah, so if the number of users is very low, I think the lowest price point that we have is 150 or 200 euros per month. And then when the game gets big and the game developers get rich, we charge more.
So you don't track performance?
No. Okay.
I just wonder, we have a lot of game studios here, like Google, of course, Game Duel, Ill Games, and a lot of others. Do you use all these metrics? Do you use just a few or none at all? So is it part of your day-by-day business to keep track of all these things in the different phases of your game life cycle, or do you just start? I just wonder, so do you use it? Yes.
Great.
Do you want to use it? So you already use it. Is it all of these metrics, or just a few which you're really interested in on a dashboard, or how does it work? Is it all?
Well, there are one or two like new ones we're not really actively using it. We really like, we want to look at more. But basically, yes, it's the same thing we do as well. I mean, it's pretty close to what we do. I mean, the next step then becomes like interesting, that getting actual insights out of it. Now that's kind of the tricky part of it. It's like getting like, wow, that's interesting. In fact, it's not the most difficult thing, but then, as you mentioned as well, now we have to derive these actual insights.
Yeah. And that's the work, right? Yeah. And then, people can't be disappointed when they say, okay, this number now. First, the question is it good or bad? Yeah, is it good or a bad number? Yeah. If something is going down, then you might say, well, that's bad. Then you start to look into it. But it's not always obvious to see, what do I do? Yeah, what's causing this? What's the cause and effect here? And then, in fact, it does take some, intellectual or analytical work to understand it. Yeah. But that's the power. Yeah? So once you understand and once you have somebody in your team that knows how to work with this, that's pretty powerful. Yeah? That's pretty powerful. And I also talk a lot to like old games companies, who develop box games and so forth. Yeah? They really envy online game companies for the ability to be launching games where you have some metrics, where you kind of know what the users think or what the users do. Yeah? In the old days, it's like really quite terrible. The best they could do is like launch a game, put it on a CD, put it in a box, sell it in Saturn or MediaMarkt, and then hope it works. Yeah? And they have gone maybe through 100 playtesters before. Yeah? That's they observe how people play the game. Yeah? That's what they did. Yeah? So nowadays, exactly. They do surveys and they watch how people do it. Yeah? But that's super little. Yeah? Right now you could put a couple thousand users and see how they behave. Yeah? That's much more relevant. And you can do that once, twice, 3 times over a period of months until you're happy. Yeah? And until you say, well, now let me put my real marketing budget behind it. Yeah? So those old companies, old quote unquote, they really envy online game companies or web companies for this. Yeah?
So that's changing pretty fast, which is why every big company is not doing Origin, Battle.net, DSDay, whatever, they're tracking everything now.
Yeah.
So they're doing great.
But still, it's a mind shift.
Yeah,
because most of these people work on this, and now they have to work on that. And as you know, changing is not easy always. Yeah.
Referring back to the previous question, how many of you have published games out there, or you just still regarding using analytics? How many has published games? Games out there,
So there's no game developers here? So I think, so let me repeat the question. So the question, I think your question was, how many of you have actually a game out there that you developed?
Who has a game out there?
Where's everybody else? Just sitting here. Okay.
So there is no one that you're not using analytics yet. So there's very few using.
Everybody's
worried analytics using
I think it's kind of interesting. I think there are a lot of gamification concepts that are more like psychological and not really numbers driven. So we tried out a lot of stuff which happen to do a lot with analytics, but that's probably very big.
So what did you evolve? What are you doing now?
We are doing a mobile app called Clap, just like a mobile app for fun challenges and games. So basically you could challenge or clash a friend to do almost anything. And yeah, the interesting thing is, I mean, basically what we're doing is like we're building an application around the concept of competition. There are just like so many formats in which you could actually try them out. And that's what we were doing.
So how do you find out which one is the best format?
It's actually kind of hard because first of all it's a mobile app. So it's not that easy to A/B test anything. So it's basically like finding little cohorts, little groups, and we let them play and use their feed. So it's not really number driven, but I'm happy for any suggestions.
Okay.
Do you store if you're using your service, do you store the raw data like each individual event, or do you aggregate it and only store the aggregation?
We do both. So we store each individual event that never gets lost. Yeah. But then in terms of to process it faster, we use certain aggregations.
I was wondering, do you allow your clients to get copies of the data from the
Yeah.
So you just set up an export process. You can just get a download.
Yeah, we have an API where people can download it. Or if there's a business person, they can download it with Excel or CSV.
But also the raw data. Do you get access to the raw data?
You could. Yeah, we have an API where you can extract the raw data, and if you have a data warehouse, whatever, and you want to do predictive things by yourself, for example, you can do that.
Yeah, because one thing I could imagine is that, I mean, one of the problems is like everybody's doing game foo and game bar now, so you compete. See, it's always the question, how do you get better than the competition? Now you have the same game 5 times in the market, and one way to be better is have better analytics. If everybody's now using the same analytics service, you're basically losing one opportunity to win.
That's not entirely true, because that's just the service to give you. You still need people to interpret and use them.
Yes,
so it's actually human capital.
Yeah, but you're losing on the low level side where you can actually really like do different kinds of analytics. So not get only get that pre-process stuff, but have the Hadoop thing and do magic stuff and whatever.
I would make a counterpoint to that. So if you have your game company and you have the choice of hiring a person, and that one person can develop such a thing, or you hire somebody who is an analyst who interprets the data, I would always recommend you to hire the second person, because that's where you get the insight. The interesting thing is the insight. Yeah. And that's your competitive advantage. I agree with you said. That's the advantage. The advantage in terms of getting data, that's good and that's necessary, yeah, but it's not a sufficient condition to be having a better game.
All right, so I think we move on a bit. We have one more talk before a short break, which is Moritz, talker from Center 1. If there are any more questions, pin them down on the board later on, and you can go from there. Thanks, Mark, for this overview.
Thank you.
All these metrics.
Thank you.